Hi, I'm Hannah.
Hi, I'm Abby.
And this is Spilling Ink,
The Ink Spill podcast.
We are back with season 2, episode 2.
Yeah, looking at everything editing, our favourite thing to do.
Yes, so obviously in episode 1 of this season, we were kind of introducing, we were catching up, weren't we, on season 1 and kind of the things we've been up to since then. And kind of talking about our relationship with editing and what we kind of wanted to get out of this season, weren't we?
Yeah, all the good stuff, all the fun stuff. So yeah. I hope people have listened to it.
Yeah. No worries if you haven't, though, because...
no pressure.
We didn't really have anything valuable to add other than what is it? What do we understand about editing at the moment? And,
Which is minimal.
If anything, we had questions, didn't we? That were...
Yes, this is a season of questions for us. Definitely something I think we hold our hands up that we are the weakest at.
Yes, yeah. And I think it's a stage of writing which it's obviously the most... Well... The initial draft, really, the initial idea is the most crucial. But then I'd say this is probably the second most crucial because this is bridging the gap between coming out of your head before it's then gifted to the world, essentially, depending on what you want to do with it. So it's the first time that you're going to have some critical eyes maybe cast upon it. So it's going to be quite interesting to hear some different people's experiences with that.
Yeah, very much so, very much. It's like a really important transitional step that I think people neglect quite quickly.
Yeah.
So... good for us.
Including us. We've said that we've done that in the past as well, haven't we? So last episode, what did we set for our little kind of creative task?
Yes, yeah, we kept it quite simple for the first episode back. We were like, for us and people listening, we were just looking at doing a bit of self-editing of whatever sort of piece you're going to work on, whether that's a collection of like small collection of poems or a novel or anything basically. Sort of taking the time to do a bit of self-edit and identify things before you hand them over to someone else and cast a critical eye, I think was the line you used.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's as well, we were talking about the fact that often when you start a project compared to when you get to it at the end, you are a completely different writer, a completely different person. So sometimes it's quite nice to actually go back to the beginning and just have a comb through it again and just make sure that everything is as you want it to be. You've not skipped over any integral parts such as insert some kind of action scene here or
which we're both guilty of.
Some juicy something here.
Yeah, something in brackets that we're just like, we'll get back to, and then you don't.
You just simply don't. So how have you found that task then?
Yeah, I only had about 20 poems to start with, so it was interesting to kind of have time, and they're quite short ones really. They're only about 20 lines, 20, 25, maybe a couple longer, but like not really very long. So
that's huge to me. I do really dinky poems, so that seems like a lot to me. But I mean, each to their own. Yeah,
each their own. Yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't know. I don't know. I think because I'm not quite sure where this is going, and I've kind of had to come back to like doing a chapbook or a pamphlet. I'm like, I feel a bit like I'm on uneven ground. So maybe that's like, we keep talking about like, we need to do a bit of research. We need to figure out what a chapbook is, what a pamphlet is. How many poems are in a collection? That'll be my homework for next week for me. Is just
I was looking into chapbooks actually.
Yeah.
I was doing a bit of Googling just the other night, and so this particular publisher that I was looking at recommended 15 to 20 for a chapbook.
Cool.
Whether the next Google question is a chapbook and a pamphlet the same thing? And I'm going to say
tune in next week to find out.
We'll finally get answers to our
questions.
But yeah, and if you guys know, please do drop us a comment. But so 15 to 20, and that to me, that seems really like just nice and manageable. That seems lovely.
Okay, so it's definitely it's a chapbook then.
Yeah.
By that, yeah.
But I've seen I've got some really beautiful chapbooks as well. I think when they're a little bit smaller, you can have a lot of fun with them in terms of kind of the format and the actual look of the chapbook. So
yeah, that's totally it. So I had a good look over stuff. I think it's not been that long since I wrote some of them really, so it's quite nice that there was quite they were quite sort of in my head already still, which was good. I just went through and just sort of played around with, I think it was mainly like punctuation that I was sort of faffing with. I'm a very passionate punctuation person, lots of P's there. And I was like figuring out how I kind of want like lines to run on, things like that, or where the line breaks need to happen and stuff. So
a mix up between enjambment and caesura.
Oh, who's the teacher here?
Who's the teacher? It's so funny, my kids are absolutely obsessed with the term enjambment. It's all they ever talk about.
Really?
Even when they're not even analysing a poem and they're like, Miss, could you say that enjambment has been used here? I'm like, no, because this is a piece of fiction. It's not a poem.
It's just a sentence, guys.
But I think that's the beauty of the editing process now, isn't it? Is putting those kind of finishing touches on it and making sure it's exactly how you want it to be.
Yeah, I think it was interesting to figure out, like, I I think I've talked about before, like when I write poems, are often they stay as they are. I might change like a few words or punctuation, but I often like change like the structure of it. But I was really trying with a few of them just to see how like the structure feel, if I pushed it to like longer lines or shorter lines, or like tried to settle it into like more like stanza style, and like it was interesting doing that after the fact rather than writing with that in mind. So yeah, it's been interesting. I think I definitely still need to kind of like play with it a bit more, but for me life is now settling down and I have a bit more time to do that, so that's probably something I'll sort of casually slip into my own work this week as well.
I think something that would be quite nice for you, with the fact that you are experimenting with page poetry now, is really thinking about how it looks on the page. So you're kind of putting that structure in retrospect, aren't you, and kind of thinking, well, which structure is going to complement the meaning of the poem. I think if I was you, I'd get quite experimental with the way it looks on the page, because I always think they're the more interesting poems to look at.
It's funny you say that. Adrian B. Earle, who we're talking to next week, his collection 5000 Hertz has loads of really like funky formatting, and it's like really interesting. There's a lot like on the eyes to look at, and it's definitely been like a massive influence for like structuring poems kind of visually for me, because I have, like you say, I haven't done that for a while. So yeah, it should be fun to play around with.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of page poetry. That's what I've always quite liked about it as well. I remember thinking this was so creative. I did a poem about the sea and I made it look like waves, and I was like, wow, she's an artist, she's an icon. No one's ever thought of this before. I just looked at it and googled it the other day, and it's like 1 billion poems that are in the shape of waves. I was like, no, it was original. I started this trend.
It was original to you.
It was, yeah, it was. So yeah, for me, the novel writing side of things, yeah, it's really annoying with novel writing, isn't it? Because you get to a word count and you get so excited that you've hit that word count, and there's nothing more soul destroying than when you go through and you read it and you realise you've just waffled, and that's why the word count is so high. And every time you're slashing bits out of it, it's like a little dagger to the heart, I think.
You better not be deleting them though, because I know what you're like. You better be putting them somewhere safe. That
just refining. I'm kind of thinking, well, why have I used 3 adjectives here when 1 would do, and kind of why have I over-egged the description of this character when in actual fact just through the dialogue we get a pretty strong sense of who they are. And I think there's just been quite a few things where I've been a bit scared in kind of like my infancy as an author to let my readers make their own decisions, kind of form their own conclusions, and I've kind of tried to spoon feed them a lot. And in actual fact, I've kind of tried to strip back a bit so that there's less telling and more showing, so that then people can make their own minds up. They don't just need me holding their hand through the text.
Yeah, because ironically, you're the one that needs your hand holding as the baby, whereas they'll be the established readers who are used to good stuff.
They'll make their own minds up about my characters and about my settings and things. But through doing that, it's like I've knocked a quarter off the word count. So I went through and I was just like, anything that feels quite superfluous, anything that feels a little bit waffly, I'm getting rid. It's going. And I was like, gosh, right, okay, lost a quarter of my words, but then I know what I'm left with is what I'm happy with. So
yeah, it's quality over quantity at the end of the day.
Absolutely is. And I say that to my kids all the time, so I need to start living by that rule myself as well.
What, hypocrites? Us?
Never. No. Never. But yeah, so that's me. For me it was just cutting the waffle, but I kind of think with me I'm at that point now where I need somebody else to cast a critical eye over it. And luckily for me, I get the benefit of Gareth's critical eye.
Yes, you definitely do.
Yeah, who we're going to be interviewing today. He's going to be our first guest of the season, isn't he?
Do you want to intro him?
Yeah, why not? So Gareth and I met a good few months ago now. I'd say it was about 6 or 7 months ago. And I've only actually met him in person once. We've kind of virtually met all the time. Because
it's very pandemic-y related. Even though it's like 2024, it's got,
It feels that way as well. Yeah, he's my virtual friend. But we met through, he runs a writers club in Huddersfield. So I was invited along to participate in that, and it's very much every fortnight we share work, we critique each other's work, we offer feedback, and through doing that, I discovered that Gareth himself is an editor. He's a freelance editor, and he's always got work on the go of different people that he's trying to feed back to, and his feedback to me has been absolutely fantastic. So I kind of thought, do you know what? If we've got questions, Gareth is probably the guy to ask. He's very knowledgeable, extremely experienced in this field. So I thought, let's pick his brain.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the wonderful tales of Gareth from like you and other members of the Inksville community, but I'm just really excited to speak to him and just hear what he has to say and learn some tips and tricks.
Yeah, and I think as well, because we do usually on Write Club just talk about our work, I'm quite excited to learn more about him, maybe how he got into this industry, and how he finds being an editor as well. So yeah, I'm excited to kind of learn some more about Gareth.
Sounds good. Should we go talk to him?
Yes, let's go have a little chin wag.
Hello, Gareth. Thank you so much for joining us. It's really lovely to have you here on the Spilling Ink podcast. Please, could you introduce yourself, including your work?
Okay, right. So I'm Gareth. I'm a freelance editor working primarily with sci-fi, fantasy, and any sort of speculative fiction novels and novellas. I cover all aspects of editing, including developmental, copy and line edits, and proofreading. I'm also a layout specialist, helping authors get their finished manuscripts ready for self-publication in both print and ebook versions. Also, for my sins, I'm an author with one steampunk novel and a series of Weird West novellas available. And I'm currently shipping my latest supernatural cyberpunk novel around to agents and publishers to see if I can get some representation. When I'm not editing 9 to 5, I try and find time to write more novels from my backlog of story ideas. So between all the editing, layout, and my own novels, I'm pretty much engrossed in the writing scene.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
Super, yeah. I mean, there were quite a few things that you said there as well that I think later on it'd be really good to kind of get a little bit more information on really what they mean, because this is the reason why we've kind of dedicated a season to editing, because the entire podcast is very much Abby and I getting into the writing world, kind of getting our own pieces out there. And there are a few things you said then that I've definitely heard, but I don't know what those terms mean. So it might be quite nice to break them down a little bit. At the beginning, you kind of said different types of editing for different types of...
Sure.
What do they mean?
Okay, so editing, I guess a lot of authors or anyone who writes has this knowledge that editing is a necessary evil that has to happen in the process to actually make things work. Editing is, if you look at traditional editing with, if you were to get your work placed with one of the big five, for example, they would have a series of editors that would look at your work. So the process normally starts off with what's called developmental editing. So that's sort of someone looking at the big picture of your story and sort of seeing if there's any obvious issues that don't sort of work. So if there are sort of obvious gaps in the story or major issues or, with continuity or things like that. So it's looking at the big picture really and sort of seeing is the structure of your novel sound, for example? Does it make sense from start to end? Are you, have you set up things at the start that you rely on later on in the book for your big conclusion, etc.?
Yeah.
So that's developmental editing. From there, we've got sort of copy and line editing, which is sometimes joined together as either comprehensive or termed as structural editing. Copy editing is sort of the nuts and bolts, I call it, of the rules of editing. This is, you actually spell how you spell things correctly, you use correct punctuation, etc. So this is where, all your sort of all your time in school in English comes to fruition, where you remember exactly when you're supposed to use a semicolon or a colon, or, how to actually quote dialogue, etc. Line editing is the sort of the art of writing, really. So this is the choosing the best way to portray a scene and having beautiful language and beautiful prose, really, in your pieces. And finally, you've got proofreading, which is the last stage before a book goes to print, in effect. So all the other editing is finalized, everyone's happy, it's laid out, ready for print, and then a proof editor reads through and just sees, is there anything else that's slipped through the earlier stages and might have even been introduced in the layout stage with a typo or something from copy and pasting. So those are the key elements. I tend to focus more on the central and end of the process. So that's copy and line editing rather than developmental, but I do put developmental edits in my copy and line. sort of editing if I see them, just to help sort of an author out to say, do you realise you've said this, but 2 chapters ago you said this about the same character, and it's contradictory.
Okay. Can I ask what's your favourite form of editing? Like, what's your
I prefer I enjoy all of it, but my real preference is line editing. Copy editing's very, there's rules and regulations for it, so it's pretty straightforward to do. Even though there are rules that can be broken, and you need to know which ones you can twist and turn and then break. But line editing is taking what someone's written and really sort of making it stand out, making it really emotive, and using the correct language, or even just swap around the order of a sentence can make a drastic difference to how it reads to a reader. So this is really the beautification, if that's a real word, of sort of taking that prose to the next level, really. And that's, I guess, what most people are hoping for when they give their work to an editor. They don't just want someone to put like a load of red underlines saying, you haven't spelled this right, you've used a comma here instead of a semicolon, etc.
That would be me. That would be me when my book goes to an editor. There will be so much red line.
I think I've met authors in the past though, and I can just tell that it's not gone through that rigorous editing process that you've just spoken about there. And I think, sometimes I think people get a little bit conned by their publishers because they don't let it go through that stage, and it doesn't come out as refined as I think we would hope. And I think sometimes I can just tell it's had a quick maybe whiz through with a spelling and grammar checker, but it's not had that person really go through it with a fine-tooth comb and, like you say, pick up on just mistakes that we all make because we're human. You've actually, you mentioned that 2 minutes ago, or there's a continuity error here. So yeah, just that the comprehensive side of editing, something that I wasn't aware of, that it goes through that many stages. So that's amazing, actually, to know.
And the fact that there are in effect different skill sets, and so you have editors who specialise in just one of those sort of forms, or other editors that sort of utilise more of them. But yeah, it's very obvious if, especially with the prevalence of self-publishing now, it's very obvious if something's not gone through a professional editor, because you'll see stuff and you'll see sort of close repetitions of words that you go, okay, that's just a bit jarring as you read it. And you just, well, hopefully you don't see horrible spelling errors, but there are so many sort of millions of books being uploaded that some people think that's the end of the journey. I've put the final full stop in there. That's the end, right? I'll just upload it and I'll become a millionaire overnight.
Yeah,
it's not the case.
As someone who's read a lot of Kindle Unlimited books, yes, yes, there are definitely people need to do more editing.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? You're just so keen. We've been talking about this in our first episode. You're so excited when you've got that finished draft, haven't you? And you just want to get it out into the world. But in actual fact, just by kind of biding your time and making sure it gets that real critical treatment beforehand, it's just gonna benefit everything, isn't it? Really, the success of it as well is gonna be, it's gonna reach so many more people if it's actually well written.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the thing that can kill a lot of books instantly is, a first reader going, this is rubbish. It's full of spelling errors. It's full of, sort of inconsistencies, repetition, etc. And if they then give you a 1-star review, and that happens to be your first or very early in the career of your book, sort of on Amazon or wherever, whichever platform you choose, that can be the kiss of death, because there's so much out there at the moment that people can just go, yeah, I'll miss that one because it's got like 2 or 3 1-stars, but it might be that the rest of the book's great, and it's just it hasn't been through that rigorous editing process, and the author hasn't sort of taken the time to do their own due diligence really in self-editing it, and actually going through it at least once, if not more times, really. So it is really essential, in the self-publishing game especially, to actually have that manuscript as clean as it possibly can be.
In your opinion then, this is something I'm quite interested in actually, how important is the relationship between writer and editor? Do you have much to do with the writer in the editing phase? What is the communication like between the two? And
okay, it varies from client to client, author to author, but ultimately it's really essential for authors to find someone who not only understands their writing and genre, but is also a lover of that genre, and who understands the usual tropes and how you can actually utilize them and where you can actually diverge from them. To actually, so they read those sort of stories day in, day out, really. And so they know what happens in that sphere. That's why I specialize in sci-fi and fantasy, because I've loved those genres since I was 9 and was introduced to Star Wars in 1977. So that sort of gives away a bit of my age there, doesn't it? But that sort of kickstarted my journey into sci-fi and then fantasy from as a reading sort of point of view. And I can still, I still see myself as a 9-year-old kid standing in the queue, sort of outside the Odeon in Leeds, all that time ago, and it made a real impact on me because it was, it was what people are wanting in fiction. It was like something new, hadn't really been done before, and that really drove sort of the sci-fi genre forward. So, a good writer and editor relationship needs to be built on numerous things. So, but, most of all, mutual respect and trust. You as an author are handing over the keys to the kingdom, in effect, possibly giving a lot of yourself personally in what you've written. So you've got to trust your author to actually be able to pick up on that, understand what you're talking about, and then give you the right sort of advice about how to move forward, knowing that they're there to help you, not to actually, be confrontational and adversarial, or treat you like a school kid and underlining everything with red pen, and sort of saying this is rubbish, do that again, see me, all this sort of stuff. They need to be happy that you know what to do with it. So, as from an editor point of view, my job is to work with an author to enhance the work to become the best it can. So for me, it's always about suggestions for improvements. I'm not about dictating, or no editor should be about dictating what the final result will or should be, but they will be working their best to actually elevate your prose and the impact it will have on readers. Uh, so an editor should, be looking to correct what's required. So from all the obvious things about sort of grammar, spelling, syntax, etc., and also being sort of quite, I'll say brutal. I will say brutal, yeah, brutal with cutting, because a lot of writers overwrite.
Yeah.
The main things that happens.
I can feel eyes on me with that comment.
Yeah. The classic line is, "Don't write 5 words if you can write 1."
Yeah.
And it's very much about less is more in a lot of cases, because you're basically streamlining the prose, making it easier for the reader to actually absorb and to be able to keep the progress moving forward. But throughout all this, it's improving the flow and readability, as I've said, but without significantly changing the author's voice, which is really important. Don't let sort of, you need to get to know your editor. Most editors will offer, a free sample edit initially before taking you on contract, for 2 reasons, really. One, it gives the author chance to see what the editor is thinking, how they understand the prose, and what they're going to get back from perhaps their first chapter. So it gives you that trial there, so the author can go, oh, this person really seems to get what I'm talking about, and I can work with them. Yeah, the conversation works well. The second reason is really for the editor to see what they're getting themselves into, and to actually say, is this person ready to actually move to editing, really? Because a lot of time people are too eager to actually do it. And even though they realize they're going to be paying for an editor to look at their work, they're potentially, 1 or 2 self edits ahead of where they should be. And they should, you shouldn't be giving editors work that's got a lot of copy editing in it, because, that's all stuff that, an author should know. You should know where to punctuate correctly. You should know how to actually use dialogue tags and how to actually sort of use quotes around text. If you're asking your editor to do that, you're sort of wasting your money in a way, because you should be relying on them to look at the bigger picture there and saying, this is how we make it better. Your story works, but we can tweak it and actually really enhance the language that you're using to make it better. So from there, what you get back from an editor then with the relationship is you've got this trust now, hopefully going on. You've decided this is the person to actually edit for you, um, and what you're getting back is a series of suggestions, usually utilizing track changes on a chapter by chapter basis, so you can see exactly what's been suggested as being changed, and from that, hopefully you see straight away, oh yeah, actually that reads better like that. But also, it will highlight if you have any specific writing ticks. So you constantly use so or something like this in sort of everything you do, and you actually realize that there are suggestions there of how you can improve your writing and make your writing better for the next time you go through and sort of write something else, or things that you spot a lot easier when you're self-editing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I
So,
love that.
I think in short, a strong writer-editor relationship is pretty much like a strong foundation for a building. It may not be the most noticeable part of your book, but it's essential for creating a polished and impactful piece of writing. And without that sturdy foundation, everything built on top of it might turn out to be a little bit wobbly, especially if it starts meandering a little off the vertical path of where you first started, which can be, and especially an issue if you have pantsers or people who discovery write rather than plotting. Your original plan might, rather than going straight like that, it'll sort of, oh, we're going. Imagine obviously your foundations, the whole thing potentially could wobble and collapse there. So that's why you have that sort of information back from an editor that will actually help you sort of say, okay, this is really good, but you need to refine this area to actually make sure everything stored up and works as you're expecting it.
As an editor, what are you looking for within a draft? So I imagine you sort of alluded to some writers need to do a good few self-edits before they get to you. But I suppose the sort of question we're looking for is like, if you're presented with a draft and you're considering taking it on, are there any is there like a checklist you run through that you're like, these are things I need to identify that I can work with?
Okay. I don't have a checklist as such, though there are things that I like to see in a manuscript that makes me really interested in working with the author. And that's usually something that's something different or something new. So in either the overall setting, the actual style of storytelling, or a unique perspective of characters that are actually involved. I like to see a compelling plot or narrative with a clear beginning, middle, and end, as that's the expectation from the readers, and it's been proven time and time again that if books, for some reason, veer away from that too far, people tend to, not realizing why, tend to just go, I'm not quite keen on this for some reason, and that's because it's it's an established. I was going to say trope. I'm not sure that's the right word, but it's established requirement really within writing, because that's the expectation through storytelling throughout the ages. Back to sort of verbal sort of things being talked about around campfires. It always needed, the good stories had a starting point to actually get you involved in it, a middle that explains what's going on, and then like a finale in one way or another. So that's sort of essential to actually see that. If you manage to sort of embed a really impressive cliffhanger, and before you plow right into your next chapter, then it's really great to actually see that, because that's the sort of thing that readers love to actually find at the end of a chapter, and then they go, oh, I've just got to read a bit more. I know it's like midnight, but I'll just go read another chapter and get on. I think we've all probably done it at some point, sort of with the torch under the bed covers when you're a kid reading sort of Harry Potter or whatever. So it's always, I suppose it's always preferable, and this is going back to the first point we made, that if you receive something that's pretty polished to start with, it shows that the author obviously knows what they're doing and how they present the scenes, and that it reads well to begin with, without any noticeable syntax errors, spellings, or grammatical issues. Yes, editors are paid to fix those issues, but seeing a predominantly clean manuscript shows that the author is serious and has invested the time to actually self-edit their work. So the other thing I guess I do is I always ask authors how much work they've already put into their manuscript. So what draft are they on, how many times have they gone through self-editing, have they actually involved any other people, have they had beta readers, all that sort of stuff. So it's just really good to actually see that someone knows what they're doing and to actually outline what the requirement is on both sides. Really, there's a contract, an unwritten contract, really being entered into, whereby the author sort of is agreeing that they'll show you their sort of work there, and you'll then sort of take that and improve it for them, while the editor is saying that you understand that I'm going to make you suggestions here, which I know from my experience in working in the genres that should be the things that work and will improve sort of readers' experience of your work, and that you will be open to suggestions and critique, which is often meant in the best way. So there's that sort of to and fro really with it, and that's, I think, it's getting that understanding up there, and also the author trusting again and knowing that the editor knows what they're doing and knows the sphere that we're actually sort of writing in.
Yeah. No, brilliant. I mean, I'm looking at the next question that we sent you as well. I think we asked, what are some of the most common mistakes you see writers make? Have you got some things that, I mean, obviously keep it anonymous. We don't want to be name dropping.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
Any kind of anecdotes? Any experiences you've had?
I've had lots of experiences with sort of mistakes that writers make. I'll go through a few of them. I'll try and keep it reasonably succinct. But there's a lot of common issues that arise, especially with new writers. As writers get more and more used to going through an editing process, hopefully, as I've mentioned earlier, that they'll learn from what editors come back with, and they'll see, I continue to do that. I continue to have an issue with tense or whatever it may be. But I break this down into what we mentioned earlier about the types of editing. So really between copy editing, the rules of writing, and line editing, which is like the art of writing. So with copy editing, we're talking about obvious issues with spelling, typos, incorrect or inconsistent punctuation, which can hinder readability, and things like subject-verb agreement, ensuring that correct or singular or plural usage is continued throughout. It's from a set of rules that you learned when you learned English in English language. So that information is available, and the rules are there, and the descriptions of how you utilize them. Having said that, I'm somewhat of a rebel when it comes to this, and I am absolutely not a grammar Nazi by any stretch of the imagination. I have a passionate hatred of semicolons, which to me, it just seems like an excuse when an author can't decide whether they need a comma, full stop, or colon. Just look at the semicolon symbol. Is it a full stop? Is it a comma? No, it's both. So what is it? And how many readers actually understand exactly the use of a semicolon and what that should do with it while they're reading through? I think it's obvious with commas and full stops that how that works, but I think the semicolon is just a throwback to sort of 1900s and before, where you have some of the classics are absolutely awful from a point of view of it's a page of one sentence sort of just strung together with semicolons all the way through it to keep it going and going and going. And the way people read and absorb media now has changed considerably. It's now that the pacing and progress through a book is really paramount, and to a certain degree maintaining the attention of the readers, who are now used to short, snappy, sharp blips of information due to social media. I think in either its written or in its video short form on YouTube or TikTok. So the bottom line is, some passages in slower parts of the book are fine, but try to ensure that your writing isn't too flowery or over descriptive just for the sake of it. Make sure it fits with what you're actually writing. That's what leads me into the line editing issues. So the art of writing, really, because that's part and parcel of that. It's just because I went off on one about semicolons. So we're talking about how the writing describes the story, people and places. So issues with clarity and conciseness, really. So common issues here include poor word choices and cliches. So editors try to enhance common but poor choices of descriptive language. For example, never say the woman over there in the red dress, or the nice red dress, even worse. It's much better to use something like the beautiful flowing scarlet gown. Basically it's descriptive. It gives an idea of movement and the color. So rather than using sort of classic sort of killing two birds with one stone, it's such a cliched phrase that is used all the time in English. But try and keep things fresh. I always suggest to my authors about keep it in world, as it were. Just rework it, recreate that sort of cliche into something that your readers will understand. Because I tend to work with sci-fi and fantasy, you've got a lot of world building there. So hopefully, you can come up with something. Readers aren't stupid; they'll get the gist of what you're talking about, even with an in-world reference they're not used to, realizing that it means okay, it's doing one thing but gaining multiple sort of actions out of it and saving time. So that's another thing. Another big thing: unnecessary information, which is a common problem. Avoiding long-winded explanations or irrelevant details that bog down your story. This is really prevalent in action scenes or when the pace should be barreling along, but the protagonist suddenly starts to reminisce about a woman in a beautiful flowing scarlet gown, instead of leaping between carriages and sort of chasing after the main villain. On top of this, you've got info dumps, which is where a lot of information is suddenly presented in a big block that tells you about the history of the world, or something about this character that everyone in the world should know, and hence the reader should know. It's usually done from because an author's done a lot of background work and has written a lot of stuff into their world and thinks, I need to tell the reader this so they understand why this is so important, why this phrase means what it means, etc. But it's overused and out of context. So it's much better to actually wait and do that sort of when the time is right within the narrative, when your main character has just encountered something or seen something or spoken with someone about something, and it's then just fine to scatter in a little bit of information that harks back to the world building there. Basically, it's like seasoning in food. It adds depth and flavor, but you just need a little dash here and there because it goes a long way, and you don't want to swamp someone with too much too soon.
Yeah.
Inconsistent point of views and head hopping. It's another of my pet hates.
Yeah.
This is where the point of view character suddenly switches, either intentionally or unintentionally. But this can lead readers to struggling to understand who did what and how does that person know that, and just a minute, how does that person see that person's thinking this? Because especially if you're going from a limited point of view. So if you're going from a limited point of view where you have either third or first person limited, so you're very trying to keep very tightly in what the main character can see and can know. But it's just being careful with those things, and especially it's not a do not do this sort of thing. It's if you're going to do this, try and make it a section of its own, make an obvious break. Either it's at worst it's a paragraph break, but I tend to sort of suggest people use either a full section break or a chapter break there to actually introduce a different character, especially their point of view and understanding of what's going on. Overusing dialogue tags. It's like, he said this, she said that, he said this, she said that, he said this. Rather than realizing that if you've only got two people in a conversation, you can just throw the dialogue on because the dialogue starts on a new line because it's a new person speaking, classic sort of English language stuff. And then if it goes on for more than half a page, and throw in either a dialogue tag to actually just reaffirm that this is character A that's speaking, or use a different means of doing that. So you don't need to use a dialogue tag. So use like a beat, so a story beat. So you actually describe a bit of descriptive narrative. So something more like you're describing someone's facial features there. So Gareth looked up, sort of glaring into his eyes, and then straight into the dialogue. Do you really think that was what I meant? Rather than sort of having to say, Gareth said, he said, she said, whatever else as well. So that's doing double duty really. That's helping you out, because not only is it setting the scene, it's doing a bit of description of the character and how they're obviously feeling from what their visual aspect is. Plus, it's introducing who's speaking. Another big thing then is, I always suggest, introduce who's speaking as fast as you can. So ideally before the actual dialogue starts, because the worst thing in the world for a reader is to read a huge swathe of dialogue, so half a page of dialogue, thinking, oh, this is obviously character A. And then it gets to the end of it, it says, said character C, who's like, oh, and then they stop. It basically throws them out completely, because they've got this inner voice that they've created for that character, and they've already spoken that dialogue in their head with that character's voice, and then they've been told, oh no, that's not the character you thought it was. So it's like, stop, out of the action, back, probably have to reread it to actually get that correct thing. And so it's always useful to get either a beat in there that describes which character it is, or a dialogue tag at the start, just so people are aware straight away of who it is. So that's, I guess, all that is things that crop up. But I suppose the old chestnut is show versus tell. And that's the big thing about sort of writers need to show what's happening to the reader, rather than just telling them what's happening. And that improves the reader's immersion in the story, because they're sort of learning about, what's going on. Oh, that indicates that this person is unhappy about it, rather than Jeff said unhappily. Because it's lazy in one way, and it's a very obvious sign of a new writer, because that's something that crops up a lot, and in lots of writing sort of information about how to write. That's one of the big things that comes up a lot. There is a time and place for telling. I wouldn't suggest people sort of use showing to actually sort of look at a section where you're trying to move the story on. So you want to actually move a day forward, or a significant distance on a train journey, if it's not relevant to the actual story, other than getting you from London to Aberdeen. So if there, telling's fine. It took the 9:15 train to Aberdeen. And the arrival at the other end, rather than saying, oh, and while I was looking out the window, this happened and that happened, and describe 3 or 4 hours of journey. So I guess that's the sort of the core things there, which are all pretty generic, but it's things that we come across as editors and have to sort of deal with, and it's part of the learning curve for writing, really.
Yeah, I love that. That's really interesting. I think there's a lot of stuff there that I can. I'm wincing because I can definitely hear it in my I'm writing my second draft, and I definitely hear bits and pieces. I think it leads us quite nicely on to the next question, which kind of flips the script. I guess for all of us as writers, when you're looking for an editor, what should you keep in mind?
I'll reiterate one of the things I've already said, which is make sure you've done as much as you possibly can to self-edit your work first, before you actually go into trying to get an editor to work with you. And understand that the first draft is just the beginning. You finish the story, you're very pleased with yourself, as you should be, because you've done a lot more than most people who decide to write ever do in actually getting something finished. But that's the beginning of your journey. So you need to find someone, as I said again earlier, that you can get on with, that you can trust with your work, and that is going to actually improve it. So I guess, really wait until you've exhausted your willpower and ability to read another word of your own work. Then that's the time to get a professional involved. Even though you've been through it numerous times and it's absolutely perfect, you'll still be surprised at how much has slipped through, or been introduced in second, third, or fourth edits. And as the author, it becomes more and more difficult to see the errors after a while. It's a bit like, not being able to see the sort of the leaves for the trees, the wood for the trees, should I say? Because you know what the story says, and your brain just fills in the gaps as you're reading it. And when you skip over something, it goes, oh well, I know what that was anyway, so it doesn't matter. So you just become blind really to the effect. So snow blind really, in effect. You can't see what's right in front of you sometimes. And then you sort of slap your head when you say, oh, I can't believe that someone found sort of something like that's that obvious. The other thing I tend to do with that is, find an editor who is well recommended. Find some details about them. There are a lot of sites out there that help with this, things like Upwork, things like Fiverr, and look for someone who's got good reputation on the site, is obviously established, and if you can see a lot of feedback about them that says they were great, they did this and they went above and beyond, then you know that they've got an interest in helping people move forward. The thing I tend to do with people who I don't feel are ready is I won't take on the work, but I'll tell them up front. I said, I don't think it's quite ready yet. You really need to actually look at honing your craft a little bit more. And in that case, I tend to sort of give them a few pointers about sort of looking at writing groups, because they're an excellent way of getting great feedback about your work, especially if you're a new writer. And you basically get a lot more from other authors who are in the same boat as you. So it's really about sort of finding someone who's, I guess, ethical or got integrity that will stop you from spending your money, rather than just saying, oh yes, that's fine, I'll edit that, that'll be £2,000 or whatever, and then all you get back is something that's been through Grammarly. You hear horror stories about it, but if you use someone that's come from a reputable source, then you're in a good place to start with. And if they're a member of several organizations, that's just adds kudos to what they're saying about themselves. So always sort of be careful about who you're actually approaching. Make sure you're comfortable with them and that they understand your work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really, really good advice. I've learned loads from this conversation already. I'm just blown away by how much I didn't know, but also how much you've kind of got to look out for and pre-prepare before even entering this next stage of the writing process. So it's been really valuable. Thank you so much, Gareth.
Have you ever experienced tension in the editing process, and how do you or did you overcome that?
Okay, I presume you're meaning sort of tension between editor and author.
Yes.
Yeah. So I've only ever had one issue, I think, with editing where the relationship with the author was somewhat or became somewhat adversarial. I make it clear to authors from the outset that I'm just making suggestions based on my experience and what should work within the genre, and it's up to them ultimately to either choose to accept them or not. But I've gone through this numerous times. I've got the experience of working in these genres for just over 10 years. So, and I've read all these genres for most of my life. So I know what happens, what works, what doesn't work. So on this one occasion, the author wasn't happy at the number of suggestions returned in their first sort of turnaround of manuscript. And unfortunately, it appeared to have bruised their ego. So instead of taking the suggestions with the intended aim of me improving their writing, they began to question absolutely everything and disagree with many well-established guidelines, even down to sort of head hopping between characters within, 3 or 4 characters, points of view cropping up within the same paragraph. Things like this that are just difficult to read for a reader. But I just want to restate really that it can be difficult handing your work over to someone else for them to look at and then knowing they're going to critique it. But understand that a professional editor is always trying to help you move your story forward to make it the best it can be, and make suggestions based on established working practices and industry knowledge. So know that you as an author also have the responsibility for accepting the criticism in the manner that's intended, as in improving your own writing and making this piece of writing that you've put together work for the readers, which ultimately is what you want. You want readers to have a great experience, and so this is what's trying to be achieved. So don't take things personally. I think it's a good mindset to get into for any writer, regardless of where you are in your writing career, because regardless of whether you believe that it's an issue or not, that one person, or possibly more than one person, has mentioned something that didn't work for them. So if that's not resonated for one person, there's surely going to be more people like them that will also find that it doesn't resonate.
Yeah.
Especially, the thing that you really look into is how many people mention the same thing. If you get 2 or more people mentioning the same issue as they see it, then you really should be looking at it and going, okay, maybe I need to look at this in a slightly different way and need to take this on board. And even if it's something that you didn't think was that problematic, obviously other people are seeing it differently. So it's, that's sort of something that is a real onus on the author to be willing to actually engage in the process. So with the example I mentioned, in the end, I just said, look, we need to discuss this, and you need to be on the same page as I am here. And ultimately, do you want to continue with this process, or do you want to change the focus? And we'll actually change this more to just a copy edit, so that you're not concerned about sort of how other aspects of it that you believe are fine should be dealt with. But ultimately, they sort of decided that they'd take the bat and ball home. So we basically ended it there. But I always sort of work in a professional manner, so I just said that's fine. You can do that. I'm not going to charge you for this last set of editing that we've done, because you've not got nothing out of it. So just either go away, have a think about it, come back later if you're happy, or find another editor who you get on better with. So that's the only thing, really. I think the only other issue that I've come across is what I've mentioned already, which is writers that aren't ready to take the next step into professional editing, because they are still learning the craft and they're not quite at a stage where it's worth them investing more. Because the amount of time that it would take to go through and correct something where it's just riddled with basic punctuation issues, it's just not worth doing that. It would become such an expensive endeavor that you'd be spending so much money. You just go, right, how am I going to live now? Well, how am I going to pay my rent? Or it's just not worth it. So they're the only things, really. So on the whole, I think I've had a pretty good experience throughout sort of the time I've been editing, and usually the authors I work with are just really open to absolutely everything, and even though we don't agree on everything, they at least are willing to listen and think about the things, and possibly, instead of taking my suggestion, go away and actually rewrite that section using sort of the ideas that I've placed there to say, this needs to change, and sort of be more focused on whatever it is that's the issue that's complicating things. So I've been really lucky ultimately in all.
Very last question then. We asked this to all of the guests that we've had so far, just out of curiosity. What is your favourite book then, please?
Okay, so this is the most difficult question that I knew you were going to ask, because I've seen a couple of the other podcasts previously. It's difficult because I've read so much over the past 40-something years that it's tricky to come up with just one. So I did I tried to do an initial shortlist, aiming for 5, and failed miserably. Eventually, I had to force myself to stop once I got to 15.
Fair enough.
This has been a really torturous to limit it down to just a few. And I really must apologise to all the amazing authors who I haven't got the chance to mention here, but I forced myself down to just 3 books or series, so I hope that's okay.
That's fine.
But these are things that have left a really lasting impression on me, and in no particular order. They are The Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells, which is a sci-fi set of novellas and one novel covering the first-person journey of a sarcastic security robot that hacks its own software to be self-aware and to live its life as it wants without restriction. Its role is to protect its human clients, but it would much prefer to just leave all the squishy and difficult emotional interaction aside and instead just watch trashy soap operas.
Sounds good.
It covers all the sci-fi tropes with action and adventure, but overall it grapples with what it is to be human: freedom, self-identity, and friendship. It's now been picked up by Apple TV as a series, so I'm really excited to see how it transitions from page to screen.
Fab.
Second is Red Rising by Pierce Brown, which is a gripping sci-fi adventure, again with a first-person narrative, covering the experiences of the protagonist, Darrow, who's a red in a galaxy where all social standing is based on the colour you're assigned or born into, with red being the lowest on the scale, hard manual labour terraforming Mars, ready for higher-ranked humans to settle from an overpopulated Earth. It covers real heartbreak and themes of class struggle, rebellion, social injustice, and a fight for freedom from an oppressive regime full of lies and deception. It's pretty visceral and could be described as the twisted love child of The Hunger Games and Dune, or in my mind anyway. So, the protagonist grows throughout this book, and going from being sort of the hero to possibly an anti-hero is forced into a lot of horrible decisions that need to be made if there's any chance for this regime to change and for those on the lower strata to be able to have more free will and the freedom that really they should have.
That's amazing.
Sounds really good.
Yeah, then finally, last but not least, Sea of Rust and its prequel Day Zero by C. Robert Cargill. This is a post-apocalyptic view of Earth from yet another first-person POV. So a bit of a theme going on there, I think. It's about an AI robot named Brittle, who is much more than just her programming. The last human has died, and the robotic AI are now the dominant species on Earth. Regardless of being a robotic protagonist, you soon lose yourself in the amazing characterization and what motivates her in this new but ruined world. A key aspect is her sense of identity, what it means to be alive and to potentially have a soul or not, and her interaction with others of her kind, all with varying levels of sentience and morality. Overall, it paints a picture of hope and perseverance, and Brittle never gives up on her journey of survival and self-discovery. The prequel is perhaps even more poignant, set as the AI uprising begins, before the humans are extinguished, where a robotic nanny tries to save the young child of a family it was purchased to serve.
Oh, wow.
So, I guess on reflection, I'm a bit of a sucker for first-person narratives, which I hadn't really realised until I answered this question. But I think you get, really deeply into the mind of the main protagonist and experience the world from their limited point of view.
Yeah.
And with only the information they have access to in order to make difficult decisions. So that's my one favourite.
Yeah,
super.
I love that, and if you'd like to send the full list across, we'll very happily share all 15 on our social media, because those were three really good.
People are really interested.
Yeah, those were 3 really good recommendations, so we're happy to, and we like sharing. I think that's the joy of this for us, is meeting people. Well, I know you, Hannah, but meeting people and hearing what they do beyond those interactions you've had with them, and we got loads of good recommendations last season. So,
we did,
we're no stranger to buying more books, are we?
Yeah, exactly. But I think that concludes our chat. Thank you so much, Gareth. That was really, really useful. And I just found that really interesting. So thank you.
Yeah.
Fantastic. No, it's been a pleasure. And thank you both for actually inviting me on.
No, it's been lovely. It really, really has. Thank you so much. Oh my God. How good was Gareth?
Brilliant. Do you know what? I knew he would be as well, because he's just given me so many valuable insights in the past.
Yep.
And I've always wanted the opportunity to just pick his brain away from our writers group and just really kind of get to know what it's like to be an editor.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard great things about him. It's always been really positive, but just sitting there, I was treading the line between writing poetry and writing novels. I still thought there's a lot of stuff for the poetry that I'm writing that I could draw on, and just how to step away from cliches and how to step away from tropes, and he was just also just such a nice guy.
He was a genuine lovely guy, and I think I knew that he'd just have a lot to share with us as well. And there were just so many things he told us about the intricacies of the editing process that I didn't even consider. No. So yeah, really brilliant, and some valuable insights and advice.
Yeah, we could have gone on. We were we were reticent to let him go at the end.
I know, we both came off and were like, how many much past this and this, but then at the same time we're like, we had kind of been talking to Zero for an hour, but you know what, really, really useful conversation. So thank you very much, Gareth, for joining us.
Can I ask, what was your favourite piece of advice? Just out of curiosity.
I think for me it was talking about the mistakes that people make when they are submitting a first draft, and I think what he was talking about was really really useful in terms of actually being critical with yourself and not wasting your time and money on an editing process if you're not at that point yet. So kind of racing ahead when in actual fact you could actually do a lot of the editing work yourself and then get real value for money. I think it takes a lot for a freelance editor to actually say that. So his honesty as well, I just think just a really, really all-round great guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about you? What did you take from that?
I liked... basically when talking about the relationship between editor and author and just being like, be prepared for someone to tell you that this is not the most perfect piece of writing they've ever seen in their entire life. It's gonna have flaws, it's gonna have plot holes, they're gonna because when, like, I'm sure with you writing your novel, you sit there and you think, oh, it's really obvious this major theme is like perfectly woven into this, and then someone else reads it and goes, I had no idea that was there.
That wasn't coming across for me at all.
And I was just sat there, I was thinking, I think I'm ready for like honesty in my writing and someone to be sort of like, okay, this is good, but also you need to be doing this now.
So I mean, following on from what Gareth's told us, we need to kind of think about our creative writing kind of projects and also the tips and activities we want to kind of give people for the week ahead.
And for ourselves, very much so.
So what are we thinking then? Because I mean, it's quite tricky, isn't it? We've already we set self-editing last week, but in actual fact, I want to set it again because I've got an insight now into what I specifically need to be looking at in my self-edits. So I think I'm thinking, I think we need to go away and self-edit again, but with Gareth's advice in mind. So make sure that we haven't fallen into those cliche kind of potholes that are very easy to tumble into. Make sure that we are showing, not telling. Make sure that we're not head hopping, and that, you know, it's just formatted in a way that makes sense. That the basics like spelling, punctuation, and grammar have been nailed, and that syntax is obviously in a way that it makes sense. That this
all of
those
words
flows.
basically.
Yes. So I think we need to be a little bit more specific about really what we're looking for. And talking to Gareth has been useful because I can actually see what an editor's looking for.
Absolutely.
So I'll have that in mind when I'm self-editing this time.
I think, I mean, the joy of these tasks is we genuinely like don't really prep them. We do try and let the conversation dictate what we think we need.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think last week we definitely needed self-editing. We definitely, like you said, you've lost a massive amount of your word count, but now you can go ahead and, like, with what Gareth said is you're not going to necessarily edit and lose stuff now. You actually might edit and build stuff now because you've cut the chaff, you know, you've settled back into what is quality, and then you can build on it with these notes, which is really exciting.
He made me laugh there when he was talking about the pantsers. He was like, you can tell he's a pantser because he just go down and start talking about all these different things, and I was like,
we definitely were just like side-eyeing each other.
I was trying to, but if I moved my head at all, the earphone was going to ping out, so I was like, trying to just make serious eye contact with you
like
instead.
slowly getting crock-eyed. But
we need one more though, because we did self-editing last week, didn't we?
I think the thing for me is that, listening to that, I was like, I really need a writers group. Like, I know it's been really instrumental for you. It's definitely something that I've been sat there and like, I'm quite a lone wolf, which is really weird because I love being around people, but writing wise, I am quite on my own. And I think for myself, and I mean, you've already quite set up with it, but maybe for like people listening, this is a time to look at writers groups, whether they're one-offs or something you want to do seriously. Like yours are very regular. You can do them online or in person.
Mine's online.
Maybe sort of looking on like Eventbrite or like Meetup. There could be some options there. So for people to find like that community of not just creating but critiquing now, and actually having some people that, like, finding environments that you trust to actually give you feedback.
I mean, the beauty of it is typically on a normal write club session for me, there's about 5 to 6 people, and just like what Gareth was saying there, if you are getting the same feedback from 3 or 4 people, you know that you've got to make a change there. And quite often I do get that. I get people saying, I completely agree with this person, I wouldn't do this, or this needs to change. And then, you know, even if you're really reluctant to do it, you know that what you're trying to put out there isn't coming through.
Yeah.
It's not just you against one person. If you've got many saying it, actually, you need to make that change, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, self-editing, but being a little bit more specific about what we're looking for.
With the editorial tips and tricks we've learned.
Based on, Gareth's feedback. And then joining writers groups or just researching writers groups in your area. Because there will be somewhere, I guarantee you, nearby there will be writers groups.
Or even just find an accountability buddy. Just find someone that you trust to write with and just do a straight swap.
Yeah.
An exchange and just start with that, if and just have that external eye over your work, because I definitely need that.
Yeah. But shall we wrap up then for season 2, episode 2?
Season 2, episode 2.
Episode 2.
I mean, another great one.
Really good.
I don't know about you, but I always feel energized when we have guests on. Like, it's always lovely chatting to you, but like when I'm listening to someone else and when I'm not listening to you.
No, I'll take it. I'll take the hint. But I do know what you mean. It's big. That feeling is inspiration, isn't it? You feel inspired now to kind of go away,
absolutely. It was wicked. So yeah, thanks again to Gareth for joining us.
Yes,
thank you to you for listening and joining us wherever you are. We hope you're doing well.
Thank you to Watson the Tortoise for being a noisy little love bug.
Yeah, I'm going to have to do a little behind the scenes of my tortoise, which is just doing the wall of death.
He's so cute.
Thanks
he just
to
keeps
Hannah.
pressing his head against the glass, like, what are you doing?
Hannah loves him more than I do at this point. But yeah, thank you. We'll see you next week when we'll be joined by Adrian B. Earle, who is just a fantastic poet, and we'll get into how he has just created 2 phenomenal collections and been published.
Yeah, can't wait.
Fantastic stuff.
But anyway, have a lovely week, and we will see you then.
See you then.
Bye.